Hello and welcome to the World of Intelligence, an open source intelligence podcast brought to you by the Janes Intelligence Unit. For more information on how we can help with OSINT training and development, go to janes.com/OSINT training.
I'm Mark Wilson, a consultant with Janes Intelligence Unit. Earlier this month, Facebook agreed to pay $52 million to settle a lawsuit by content moderators who said they'd suffered mentally from exposure to a range of disturbing material, including images of child sexual abuse and terrorism. This brings the wider topic of online research and mental health into sharp focus. Here today to discuss this topic with me is Peter King, an extremist media consultant. Now, for those involved in tracking the world of extremist media, Peter should need no introduction, but for the benefit of everyone else, allow me to introduce him here to you today. Peter's been investigating the exploitation of the internet by jihadist groups and supporters for well over a decade. He pioneered the systemic research and analysis of extremist online media, both for the UK government and later on the BBC, which you'll hear more about later. Since leaving the BBC, Peter has gone on to be a consultant, helping others understand extremist online messaging, with a particular focus on Islamist extremist use of new technologies. Peter's also developed expertise in building resilience to the effects of exposure to distressing content and has developed a range of interventions to help protect teams involved in this work. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me, Mark. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So, online research and mental health. I guess it's a poignant week to talk about this, with it being Mental Health Awareness Week in the UK this week. First question, where did all this start for you? Was there a particular moment in your career where these two areas came together?
Yes, there was really. And this dates back to 2004. So I'd been by this stage a kind of journalist for about 5 years, first worked for AFP and then the BBC. But the moment when this all happened for me was when I was working at the Foreign Office for a year and a half. And this is when I first started looking at jihadist content, Arabic language jihadist content online. And I'd only been in the job for, I think, less than a week when I was exposed to my first beheading video. Obviously, something that most people would want to try and avoid. But it was part of my job. I had to watch this. It was the time of the hostage crisis when there was a UK citizen who had been taken hostage in Iraq during the Iraq War. And eventually he had his head chopped off, and I had to watch the videos of them, which were kind of pretty nasty. Now at the time, only having been in the job for a week, I didn't really have much of a kind of framework for understanding this. So it did have quite an impact on me at the time. And that's where it all, my first experience with it kind of in at the deep end, as it were.
Yeah. And did you find at the time that was kind of hitting you on a regular basis?
So I was looking mainly at, back in those days, there was actually kind of like a less of a relentless stream than there is now of propaganda, partly because it was kind of mediated through a bit more old-fashioned technology, so through online discussion forums. So it wasn't quite, the impact in terms of quantity wasn't as high as it is now. But and also the quality of the videos was much more grainy, paradoxically, that kind of had more of a kind of visceral impact. It can seem more kind of raw and real in a way than some of the highly produced propaganda you get these days.
Yeah. So going into your work with the BBC, so at the BBC you led a team of jihadist media analysts, didn't you? One of which was myself.
Indeed.
Indeed. And this team was really at the hard end, wasn't it, in terms of viewing distressing material? And I'm just thinking, maybe for OSINT practitioners maybe listening into this podcast, where do you start to tackle this issue from a team perspective? And maybe can you take us through some of the measures that you introduced while you were leading that team of analysts to try and mitigate the effects of this material on them?
Yeah, sure. So one benefit of being in a team is that you've got the strength, you can build on the strength of the team, the strengths of the individuals in the team, but the team itself has like inherent strengths. And I mean, I'm imagining imagining that a lot of OSINT practitioners may be kind of working more in isolation, and that kind of makes you slightly more vulnerable. But being in the position that I was at the BBC, kind of running a team, we wanted to kind of like really harness those kind of strengths in the team. Everyone has their own resilience, and you may not necessarily be aware of what you do to keep you kind of self-resilient. And most of the time, I wouldn't be doing this job like for this amount of time if I didn't have some resilience of my own. And I obviously had that, enough of it at the beginning to keep me going until I kind of learned how to deal with it a bit better. So one of the things that we did in the team was to get together every month to actually kind of talk about the nasty stuff that we were exposed to. We'd kind of sit down and somebody would bring a cake or something nice to eat. And it would be a kind of way of like unloading or kind of starting to kind of process the experiences that we were having in the team. And by doing this on a regular basis, the idea is that, you can kind of help prevent the kind of buildup of unhealthy kind of reactions to things. And you also end up learning from other people's experiences. What are you, what I may do something that helps me. I may do this naturally. I may talk about that, and somebody else may have never thought about doing that, but they may kind of then learn from that. So, so doing that, trying to harness those kind of strengths within the team, and doing this on a monthly basis also had the knock-on effects that then people would be more aware of what other people's trigger points or kind of things that you met were difficult, particularly maybe it might involve children, for example, or things like that. And then you'd be in a better position when something happens, like on a daily basis, to then be able to kind of check in with that person, say, oh, actually, I noticed you had to watch this, and like, how did it go? And so the team became much better at, supporting each other as a result of that process. And so that kind of initiative really came out of a feeling that we needed to be doing something on a regular, ongoing basis. But prior to that, we'd been doing, we'd have like ad hoc resilience training or trauma awareness training. But we started doing that really in the kind of summer of 2014, when ISIS was taking over swathes of like the Middle East and ramping up their propaganda output. And we started saying, oh, wait a minute, we've got to step back and kind of reevaluate our approach to all of this, because it was all, we kind of realized we needed to be doing more than we were.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like what you're describing there, you began to foster a culture of mental health within the team, with team members kind of actively looking out for one another, in addition to holding these monthly chats that you all had. I mean, would you say, is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess, you want to, I guess as a team manager, you're suddenly kind of burdened with the responsibility of others in addition to yourself. It's probably quite easy to try and ignore your own, oh, I can kind of get on with it. But when you're responsible for other people, you start taking things a bit more seriously. So we also did other things like, trying to ask questions like regularly and kind of one-to-ones about this, and also thinking about it in the recruitment phase, like, oh, we're recruiting somebody new, asking questions about kind of general resilience issues, how people cope with things, and what do they do when they're not coping in a kind of an interview stage. So while also continuing with the kind of the general training around kind of resilience and taking up all those opportunities when they arise.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you discussed there the kind of the team element to all this. Is there a kind of a personal element to it? In terms of, can an individual, say you are, like you described, an OSINT practitioner on your own somewhere, and you don't have the benefit of having a team alongside you, is there kind of something you can do to kind of protect yourself from any type of content, not just extremist media, but any type of distressing content. And is there anything you can do on a personal level?
Absolutely. I guess there's a range of things, but for example, probably the simplest interventions may be quite kind of basic and low tech. For example, like if you've got to watch a video, try and like minimize the screen to kind of reduce the impact on you. Turn the audio off, like, unlinking the audio and the video. If you've got to listen to the audio, only listen to the audio. If you really need to look at an image, maybe don't play the video, look at stills from it. Do some of that kind of.
Oh yeah.
And you see that kind of starts to take back a bit of control as well over what you're being exposed to, because a lot of the problem with this is we kind of feel impotent. We're faced with this suffering of other people, and we're miles away, the other end of an internet line, and we kind of you can end up feeling, oh, this is terrible, like there's nothing I can do about it. So at least doing some little things like that can just help kind of take back a bit of control and a bit of agency into your own hands. And other things like, it can be quite easy to just get addicted to looking through the internet and trawling for this, that, and the other. So just, again, another thing you can do to kind of take back control is just to kind of stand up and walk away from the computer screen. It might seem a pretty simple thing to do, but actually in practice it can be quite difficult when you're kind of really getting into those little wormholes and burrows and like rabbit warrens of like doing OSINT. So actually just kind of trying to take things back into your own hands, like step up, walk away from the screen, it can kind of have like huge beneficial impacts. And I can kind of actually remember some occasions when I've had to watch something really nasty, but the feeling of kind of like, I kind of done my bit of work and then just kind of like walking away from it. And I just kind of had this kind of feeling of like, all this stuff draining out of me, as it like quite a positive feeling, as if, that's gone now, and I can walk away from it. I mean, it doesn't mean you can do anything necessarily about the suffering, and there's, that's a separate thing.
Sure. I mean, I think that's such an important point, especially for in the current environment with a lot more folks working from home. It's so important, isn't it, to try and set yourself up a safe space in which to do this type of work. So it's not the type of thing you should be, checking on your phone just before you go to sleep in your bedroom or first thing in the morning. You know what I mean? You've got to kind of try and put limiters on both sides of it and take back a bit of control. And actually, it's interesting you said in terms of techniques as well. Take for example a YouTube video. I always found that hovering over the progress, the progress bar on a YouTube video, you hover over that, and you get like little thumbnail images, don't you, of what the video is going to show. And I always thought that was it might not be 100% foolproof, but it always kind of gives you an idea of what may be coming on that video in a few minutes, which kind of helps you prepare yourself for it. Gives you that little space to prepare for it.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing for me as well. I mean, I guess when we talk about distressing material, it's images, isn't it? Videos that come to mind. I mean, I can just share one of my personal experiences. For me, it was more about sounds rather than images that had more of an effect. So I remember I reported on one of the Islamic State's Flames of War videos, and as you'll know, Peter, I mean, these videos, they had an almost Hollywood-esque level of production quality to them, and honestly, the production quality was that high. It reminded me of a Marvel superhero movie or something like that. And along with all the usual gory visuals you got with these videos, sometimes in this particular video in particular, IAS included some quite disturbing sounds in there. And I won't go into too much detail, but just let's say they involve swords. And these sounds, they came out of nowhere, and they totally caught me off guard. So there wasn't much I could do to avoid it. And it actually wasn't until a few days later I realized the video was actually having an effect on me. And I was actually watching a separate video, and suddenly I realized I didn't actually feel too good. And well, actually at that point, I actually had an avenue to deal with that because of some of the measures that yourself and other team members had brought in. So I basically went and talked to another colleague about that experience, and it kind of got it off my chest. And actually, the effect was immediate. I felt better pretty quickly. But I guess another question to you is, I guess, is there a one size fits all for this? It's probably the answer is no, right? I guess different things work for different people. Would you say?
Absolutely, definitely, and that's why I was so lucky to be in that team where you can learn from other people as well. But definitely, one size does not fit all, and different people will have different ways of dealing with things. Different people will be affected in different ways by things as well. But one thing which I guess is kind of common is that this idea of the dose effect of this trickle of things on a daily basis. There's some studies done that suggest, amongst journalists actually, a study done that suggested that the dose effect and the regular viewing of things had more of an impact than the actual extremity of the individual items. Right. So, and this also kind of like speaks to the need for like regular kind of processing of things. And if you're able to kind of do that as you go along, as you just described, then it will prevent things from building up, because it's quite one kind of response you can have. An unhealthy response to all of this is to kind of ignore it. Mm-hmm. There's some kind of thinking that's gone into something called compassionate mind training, which is like based around like the idea about how you deal with suffering. And like all of this work we're talking about is about, we're exposed to suffering, whether it's kind of other people's, suffering that we're witnessing. And there are you can either kind of cut off from that and ignore it and try and avoid it and, hide away from it. Or the kind of more healthy way to deal with it is what's kind of called a compassionate response, which is kind of noticing this suffering, but also like making a commitment to do something about it, to alleviate and prevent it. Now, in theory, that sounds great. Now, in practice, how does that actually work? If you're kind of a million miles away, there's nothing I can actually do about what's actually going on there. But it can be quite useful to think about. That one of the things that, in terms of the theory, that really stood out for me early on was this thing about a strong sense of purpose. And actually, if you kind of understand why you're doing a job, and you can, I'm doing it for this reason, it's kind of like benefiting for this purpose, in a way, it's my small part, my small way of doing something about it. And that can kind of really help just to kind of come to terms with it. And conversely, the times when I've had the most serious impact on myself from seeing things is when I know that I didn't have to see it, or when I didn't have to experience it. And I can kind of remember the feelings of feeling kind of quite angry, or like, well, what's going on? Or you're not able to kind of process it in the same way as usual, because there's no context for seeing that. I didn't have to see that. Why is that in my mind? Like, there's no reason for it. And you feel kind of quite grieved at that. But knowing that, well, I'm doing this for a specific purpose, it's my job, like I'll get so much else out of my job in addition to this, it can kind of really take you through a long way. And so the other thing I just want to mention about kind of like suffering is that it's kind of easy to kind of like respond to other people's suffering, but it's kind of harder to kind of, actually, we suffer ourselves as well. Mm-hmm. And it's doing the same thing to kind of, what can I do to alleviate my own suffering? It's much easier to fall into that negative, unhealthy reaction in terms of just avoiding it and like ignoring it all, and actually kind of doing this kind of self-compassionate thing, whereas I'm actually going to like take time to kind of think about what actually might help myself, whether it's something like stepping up and walking away from the screen, or whatever else you may choose to do. It's just from an individual's point of view, it's really important just to kind of notice how you're feeling about things. And it's really easy to go on autopilot and not notice these things. So kind of having that monthly kind of session gives you a kind of bit of a chance to step back, but also try, if you're on your own, just try and find things to kind of build into your routine somehow or other, chance to kind of step back and just take notice, because it's only once you actually notice things, oh, suddenly you sit there and think, oh, actually, my body feels really tense. I had no idea. How long have I been feeling like this? Maybe for years or decades. But it's only when you actually start to notice it that you can then even have a chance of doing something about it. And it might be very difficult to kind of like start taking those steps, but at least at least it's a positive step.
Yeah, exactly. And from what you're describing there's a range of actual, practical responses that you can undertake, that you can actually have, help you in your jobs, in your lives, basically. But
as you said, one size doesn't fit all. So what I may do, like qigong or something, which is a kind of Chinese internal martial art, may not be appropriate for somebody else. Sure. Or so it's difficult to kind of you don't want to kind of like preach to other people about what the best thing to do is.
No,
because it may not be appropriate.
Aside from all the kind of practical responses that you've laid out there, Peter, is there any theory underpinning approaches in this area? Is there like a theory of resilience? Is there a theory of trauma? I mean, can you share any of your insights in that and how that works?
Yeah, sure. So some of the, I've talked already about a couple of things. The strong sense of purpose, like that was one of the things that really stood out for me was in the first ever kind of bit of trauma awareness training that I went on, was this idea of a strong sense of purpose can get you through a long way. And this understanding that, so there's various models of resilience, and this is one that kind of crops up in a lot of them. Right. This purposefulness, having a sense of purpose. Another one is social support. So, having having people to talk to about things, or that kind of team session was partly kind of derived from that, getting together and kind of sharing things. There's a whole load of stuff around kind of neuroscience about how the brain works, which is really helpful as well. So if you can understand how the brain's evolved, then it kind of helps you to not beat up on yourself about feeling bad about things, because basically the brain's evolved in such a way that this is a natural reaction to all this stuff that we're being exposed to. You've got quite a primitive brain, which has three kind of systems in it. So like a threat system, you've got which keeps you away from danger. Yeah. You've got a drive system, which enables you to find food, find a safe place, and reproduce and all of that stuff. Yeah. And then you've got like a kind of a rest and safety system, or kind of which enables you to recharge your batteries and digest your food. So that's all kind of like when we were animals. And then later on, as the brain evolved, we developed more kind of cognitive abilities, the ability to kind of think, which had obviously very positive advantages in terms of being able to invent tools and things like this and survive. But that new brain also has some negative aspects when it kind of interacts with the primitive brain. So you then start ruminating with this, ability to kind of ruminate and think too much about the threats. So if you're kind of in a job where you're exposed to things that are a bit stressful, whereas a cat, for example, if you see a cat, like it's maybe you see another cat and it screams out and its hair goes on end and it looks really stressed out. And then 10 minutes later, it's forgotten about it and it's purring on, the sofa. It's totally forgotten about it, and it's great because it hasn't, got the same rumination as we do.
Right, got it.
And so it's, and then you've got that kind of potential for like, your threat system is like dominating all of your all of your life basically. And how do you go about doing that? And you can go about doing that by trying to kind of cultivate in a way the other side of which is like looking after yourself, or the kind of the safety system, the self-care, and the rest and the digest bit of it.
Yeah, excellent. Obviously, Peter, you've conducted online research in the extremist media space for quite some time now, and that's obviously gone from looking at just websites in the early days to ever more visual social media platforms today. And I just wonder, what's your take, Peter, on social media here in terms of the role that plays in the effect of content on researchers?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's had a massive impact over the years that I've been looking at all this stuff in terms of like the impact on the individual. So when I started out looking at all of this stuff, it was all through online discussion forums, a bit of an antiquated technology now, but it was much easier to regulate what you're exposed to. If there was a video, you'd probably have to spend 20 minutes downloading it through a modem or something before you could actually access it. So it wasn't, A, the immediacy wasn't there, and B, you could kind of then decide when to watch it and all this. Now you've got, this feed of stuff constantly coming through, and you may get kind of the same image like cropping up like repeatedly within the same feed, everyone posting the same thing. You basically can't there are ways of kind of filtering out images, but then you have to kind of weigh that up against, can I actually do my job properly without seeing all these images? And you may decide that you can't. So you have to kind of like deal with that to a certain degree. But yeah, the impact has been massively kind of ramped up. And I think even from a kind of production point of view, so from like Jihadist production point of view, when I started out, there was a lot more it was more of a kind of intellectual pursuit, as it were. The magazine, when I first started looking at all this stuff in 2004, the Al-Qaeda in Saudi Arabia at the time was producing this magazine every 2 weeks. And it was like probably about 40, 50 pages long. There are no pictures in it at all. It was all kind of religious treatises on this, that, and the other. And it was all kind of, it was quite stimulating intellectually. And some of that stuff still exists, but from the propaganda production point of view, it's much more focused on, the high impact visuals, the shorter length videos, action movie kind of stuff, which has a much huger impact and a greater toll on researchers.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I always find difficult to get around is the scrolling feature on mouses. The fact you can just scroll down web pages. And the stuff just keeps on revealing itself, doesn't it? And not even in the extremist world. I don't know if you're covering a country that is in conflict, and you're following a load of individuals on Twitter who are analysing that, and they're posting various different pictures. And of course, your Twitter feed is just so easy to scroll down, isn't it? And you just keep on consuming that content, and it's kind of set up almost in a way to have much more of an effect on someone who's tracking this stuff online. But I just wonder, just for those listening in who are perhaps involved in maybe managing teams of individuals engaged in this type of work, what do you think, Peter? What do you think are some of the general signs to look for in, say, team members that might be struggling with what they're seeing? And I guess what some of the actual initial steps you could take in that regard?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are a lot of different signs that people might display. And so probably the most useful thing to say is that to look out for any change in people's normal behavior. And so that kind of like encompasses, whether somebody's usually an introvert or whether somebody's usually an extrovert. You can't, sometimes being withdrawn may be a sign that somebody's not reacting well to something. But then if they're usually withdrawn and like introvert anyway, then it's obviously not a sign. Um, you know, so you've got to kind of judge it against. So having a good understanding of your kind of team members in the first place is a good start. And obviously kind of learning more about kind of people's triggers and things like that also helps being able to kind of spot what those triggers are. I mean, just within our team, you could, because we kind of got better at spotting those signs, you know, as you mentioned yourself, somebody came and spoke to you about, oh, how was that? And you were able to kind of talk to them about it. Or maybe it was the other way around, you were able to kind of approach them. So looking out for those changes to somebody's normal behavior is the key thing to do. I mean, obviously there are things to look out for, like increased alcohol consumption, people become irritable or, you know, withdrawn and things. And those are definitely things to be aware of. But I mean, I guess this kind of comes back to the kind of like the compassionate response as well. It's like if you see suffering in somebody else, then you need to do something about it. And that can kind of help you, and obviously it's going to help the other person as well. But it can be quite easy to kind of ignore these things, and like fostering that culture where it becomes a bit more normal and people are able to make that more compassionate response will benefit everybody. And I guess so, you know, just talking to somebody about, you know, oh, actually, I've kind of noticed this. It might be quite difficult to do that. But, you know, you'll both probably benefit from it. In terms of actually practical things to do, you know, obviously you can't give therapy to somebody and, you know, maybe able to kind of share some personal experiences, which may actually go a long way. And maybe that's all that's needed. But if people are kind of, you know, showing signs that actually they're really struggling, then there are, you know, other things just to kind of flag up other services to them. So, you know, your company may have, like we did at the BBC, an employee assistance program, which is, you know, gives access to confidential phone line where you can kind of talk about any kind of issues that you're facing, including kind of psychological or mental health issues. That might kind of then lead on to some kind of counselling. But if you don't have access to that, there's also, in the UK at least, there's something called like improving access to psychological therapies, which you can access if you just search for that online. It will take you through to a web page where you can give yourself a direct refer yourself to psychological services without even going through your GP or your doctor.
Yeah, got it. Thanks, Peter. Kind of just broadly linked in with that, just in terms of some of the challenges in this area. One of the challenges we found in the Jane's Intelligence Unit, particularly looking at extremist media, comes when you find it hard to even understand the logic of the ideology that you're encountering. Because sometimes I've felt personally that that's helped me in the past. I'll give you an example. Islamic State ideology, for example. Now, obviously, don't agree with it. If you look at it, basically, it's the use of extreme violence to achieve, in the end, what is a political goal. If you kind of strip it all away. But if you compare that to some of the more extreme or even more ultra extremist ideology we've been seeing, so some of the Satanist ideology that we've seen mixed with sections of the extreme right wing, for example, for that type of extremist, the end goal is the violence. It is basically about delivering more and more evil into society. So how do you even begin to understand that with the aim of protecting yourself from it? I mean, maybe there is no answer to that. Maybe you've just got to kind of, you know, watch it and do your best using the practical approaches you've outlined. But what do you think about protecting yourself from that type of content, Peter?
Yeah, it can be very difficult. And another thing that springs to mind is also, you know, if your job involves like looking at kind of child sexual exploitation images and things like this, which, you know, unfortunately some people's jobs do. And like, how do you kind of square that? It's like, glad that I don't have to look at that, but there are ways of kind of even dealing with that level of material. I think it comes back to, again, understanding kind of your own sense of purpose and what your own values are and what the benefit of your job is. And hopefully you've kind of got a strong sense of, well, actually, I'm doing this for a good purpose. And, to be frank, if you don't believe in what you're doing, it may be a sign that you should be looking to do something else. And you wouldn't want to like encourage somebody to stay in a job where actually it's kind of screwing them up. So that's an important thing to bear in mind at the end of all this. We kind of have a responsibility to ourselves as well. But if you do have a strong sense of purpose, actually, it'll probably kind of help you through that an awful lot. Also, the other things we talked about, like talking to other people about it and just kind of airing your own, being aware actually that I can't understand these people's where they're coming from, is just kind of vocalizing that and being able to kind of, actually, that's why I find this difficult. And it's kind of, as I said before, it's kind of, you can get on autopilot and not question things. And it's really important just to kind of step back, say, how am I feeling? What is it? And this is another great thing about those kind of sessions we had, was it kind of gave you an opportunity to kind of interrogate, well, why did that particular thing really bother me, when I may have seen other things that may have been similar that didn't bother me so much. And it may be something to do with, the fact that actually the people doing it were, may have been a less extreme thing than some other group was doing, but the fact that it just seemed kind of mindless, or you can't kind of put it into context. Just kind of understanding that in itself can be kind of helpful. So just being able to kind of step back and kind of reconsider things can be a really helpful tool.
Excellent, thanks for that, Peter. Moving on, what's your experience of the general level of organisational understanding of this issue, mental health and open source research? I mean, without naming any names, I mean, generally are organisations in this area aware of the need to protect their staff, and is the commitment there, do you find?
I think it is. I mean, the awareness has definitely improved a lot over the years. So people are kind of like looking to do the right thing. I think the area where there's a kind of slight gap, I think, is that a lot of the things people tend to be doing are a bit more reactive. And what do we do when there's a problem? Or like, how do we, offering kind of counseling, for example, is great. But in a way, you want to build these things in ahead of time. So you're kind of taking much more of a kind of preventive approach than a kind of reactive approach. Obviously, everyone knows prevention is better than cure. And what can you do? And I guess it's, you can kind of draw a parallel with any kind of job that involves physical danger. And you wouldn't think of kind of sending somebody into that job without the proper kind of protective equipment. Like if you're doing, CBRN work, like chemical whatever, you'd be wearing a full, rubber suit or whatever. If you're kind of in an NHS hospital at the moment, you've got kind of the right personal protective equipment. And, if you go onto a building site, you're wearing a hard hat. But we're not so much geared towards giving people the right protective equipment for kind of the mental health dangers. And so trying to kind of build in some of those interventions is an area which I think is a bit lacking in some organizations potentially. So, helping kind of introduce interventions which give people kind of a degree of preparedness for this material, and that kind of protective equipment analogy is really important, I think.
Yeah, Excellent, thanks, Peter. And now I believe you've launched your own bid to help organisations in this area, right? I mean, could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So my company's called Ibex Mind. I'm a director and co-founder of that organization. My partner in this venture is Dr. David Dean, and he's a consultant clinical neuropsychologist who works part-time at the NHS. And he's got a background in a lot of the things we were kind of talking about already. So we basically offer training in this area to teams and individuals who are exposed to this kind of content. But we also kind of offer these, so in addition to the upfront kind of foundation training and some of the stuff we've been talking about, we also offer facilitated ongoing support sessions where we'll sit down with the group and basically guide them through this ability to start talking about things on a regular basis, which can have all of the benefits that we talked about. And that's something that I'm not aware of being done in any other kind of way by other people. It may be been done on an ad hoc basis within organizations to some degree. But in addition to kind of like the generic kind of training, which is on offer out there, there's lots of workplace resilience training out there, but ours is much more kind of tailored towards people doing this specific kind of work. So
yeah,
work where you're kind of exposed to, the risk of secondary trauma, vicarious trauma from looking at nasty stuff online.
Yeah, I mean, now more than ever, I guess, with the kind of the growing prominence of the field of OSINT, I can only envision in the future there's going to be more and more need for the type of work that, that your organisation does. I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, but you're also involved with Tech Against Terrorism as well, aren't you? Which I believe works to support the global tech industry and tackling terrorist exploitation of social media. Could you tell us a bit more about your involvement in that?
Yeah, sure. So it's a project that I've just started working on more recently, but it's called they're building a platform called the Terrorist Content Analytics Platform, which is going to be a repository of terrorist content, which will be obviously restricted, not publicly available, but available to kind of tech companies and also to researchers to kind of understand about the proliferation of this stuff online and to be able to kind of feed into the process of being able to do something about it from a technological point of view. So it will have kind of various tools for analyzing the content on there. And I'm helping Tech Against Terrorism be able to kind of identify the right sources to ingest into this platform and providing consultancy on how to build it. It's at the build stages at the moment, but hopefully they'll have kind of a version out for researchers and the industry at the end of this year.
Fantastic. And where can folks go if they want to learn more about that? Is that the Tech Against Terrorism website?
Yeah, it's all on the Tech Against Terrorism website. There's a few press releases about it on there.
Yeah. That's excellent. Peter, thanks so much for your time. It's been a super interesting chat about this topic, which probably never really gets the attention it deserves, but yet is actually so central to the function of the teams in this area. I guess it's something that never really goes away, does it? But actually it's something that is always there with us. It's always kind of surrounding our work. So thanks so much for sharing your expertise. There's some really useful takeaways for our listeners here, especially those involved in the security field who are naturally coming up against this topic regularly. So thank you, Peter, and all the best with your initiative, Ibex Mind.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much, Mark.
That's all we've got time for today. Thanks for listening. And for more information on how we can help with OSINT training and development, go to janes.com/OSINT training.